Hello, everyone. This is Steve from A Better Life. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsors, Premium Botanical. They are the makers of Herbal Spectrum, which is a full-spectrum hemp-based CBD. They make salves, liquids, and they have a great mixed berry gummy. You can check them out at www.mypbcbd.com. Now our podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to A Better Life, GS, the abbreviated version. George is still working on his project, and hopefully he'll be back in soon. This is our first episode of our third season, which is hard to believe. I thank you all for listening. I thank everyone for all their kind words, and I think that it's been an amazing ride. And this season, we're going to try to do a little different. We're going to do some interviews. Today, giving the political climate, and we don't talk about politics much, I know, but I do tend to talk about what goes on, but necessarily give views. One of the most current events that we've had, and it's really shocking and surprising, like it always seems to be, is the assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And today we have with us my very good friend, Dom, who is an assassination expert. We talk about all the assassinations and how similar they are to certain extents and some of the theories. So how are you, Dom?
Very well, Judge. How you doing?
Good.
Thank you for having me, and hello to your audience.
So everyone knows, everyone calls me Judge because I'm a judge. So I know we've never talked about that before, but that's the truth. Set the stage, as everyone knows, and it's been weeks, and it's been a little bit out of the news since Biden stepped down. But Donald Trump dodged a bullet, literally, right, Dom?
Yeah, by a millimeter, slight turn of the head, and saved his life.
And what I find very interesting is that he never wanted this screen in back of him. He used to say, I don't want the screen, I don't want the screen. He lets it once, and then he turns around to look at it, and it saves his life.
The migrant saved his life, because that's what it was about, right? The immigration. So he was looking at it.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to paint the story for us a little bit, or how do you want to begin?
Assassinations typically are allowed to happen for prominent characters like Donald Trump and JFK. So there's a similarity between what happened in Dallas and what happened in Butler, in that you had a pullback of Secret Service protection. And I think that's what allowed this to happen. There's no way that those buildings should not have been covered. But when there's a setup, it's a setup, and that's how they do it. In Dallas, the motorcade was altered. It was not supposed to go in front of the Texas School Book Depository. The motorcycle policemen, their assignments were changed. Along the motorcade route, the Secret Service allowed for open windows. They broke their own rules in dealing with the speed of the motorcade. So, it's just a situation when they get orders to do what they have to do. That's what happens. They fail to do the obvious.
So it's interesting you bring up the Secret Service protection. It would seem that it would be anybody that was on the protection detail would say that those buildings needed to be covered. I mean, we've all been places where there's presidents either been or going about to go, and snipers on every rooftop. Yeah. Agents. I remember once when Obama came through, and I still worked on Hudson and Houston in the city, there was a barrier. And while I was waiting to see him come past, because it was lunchtime and I was drinking a cup of coffee, I put my foot up on the barrier. And he said, please take your foot down, Secret Service agent. And I took it down, but then automatically I put it back up. And he said, I told you once, I am not going to tell you again. Just like that. And I got the impression is, if you put your foot up there again, we're going to arrest you.
Yeah.
And it was that tight.
And that's the thing. Typically, their efforts are incredibly professional. They're the best in the world at it. It's just that when somebody decides that the client has to go, then that professionality goes out the window.
So you need a couple things, right? Sooner or later, if the protection is weak and they continually have weak protection, sooner or later someone's going to take a shot at anybody, right? There's enough crazies out there. So you got to figure that these people are lurking in the shadows all the time.
Typically, we'll never know how many potential assassination plots they stop from true load nuts.
Right.
That we're never told about. But the ones that are planned by government entities, they tend to go a different route. And like I said, the professionalism goes out the window. Kids who play video games, they were asked, like, where would you put the soldiers? And they said, yeah, we put them on the buildings in Butler. Everybody knows to do that, but they didn't. So you have to, the question to ask when these things occur is why? Why? Just keep asking that question, and then eventually you come to certain conclusions.
So before we get to those conclusions, we'll talk a little bit about now. I know there's a discrepancy, or at least has been a discrepancy, about how many shots were actually fired. Forget about who fired them for a minute. How many were actually fired? And I originally heard 6. I think, I forget her name, who testified before Congress, the head of the Secret Service, said that the FBI told her 6, where she refused to give an answer when directly asked and directed them to, as a matter of fact, when she was summoned to speak, obviously if she didn't come, she would have been brought there. It's hard when you basically work for the President of the United States, and your job is to protect other people other than the President. The President can't call executive privilege, right? So you're going to have to go testify before Congress. And it seems like she dodged it for a while till they actually had to subpoena her, and then refused to tell them anything because she was not running the investigation. And then after being pushed, she had all the information and started to say things that she denied she knew 3 minutes before. So she'd originally said 6 shots, I think. And I think that the most recent video, the one the FBI took of someone had taken on the ground, there's clearly 8 shots, and the 9th shot took him out.
And then later on, there's a 10th shot. So you had 3 initially, then 5. Then that was followed quickly by a shot. And then about 7 or 8 seconds later, a final shot.
So what do you, through your looking and hearing, and I know there's a lot of videotapes, what exactly do you think happened that day?
It's very difficult to say exactly what happened. What I think happened was that there was at least 2 guns firing at President Trump. I think that from the audio that we've been provided, the first 3 shots sound clearly different from the next 5. They sound, from where the audio was taken, which was to the side of the building, they sound muffled, as if it was actually inside the building. And then you have 5 shots, which absolutely could have been from Crook's position on the roof. And then that's followed by another shot, and then later on another shot. But it seems to me that there were at least 2 guns firing at the president.
And it seems to be, I'm not surprised by that. You're not surprised that there may be more than one person there. And even if they were lone gunmen, I mean, it seems to be you pull the Secret Service protection back, the crazy people are going to come out of the woodwork, try to kill them, right?
Yeah, it's just, the thing is, I just don't believe in coincidences. So if you have a situation where on that particular day when the Secret Service only had a area of protection like 120 yards or so away from the president, they allowed a guy to fly a drone that day. They were aware, or at least the police on the ground were aware of somebody extremely suspicious several minutes before. And it seems that nobody did anything. So all of those issues would have to occur while at the same time, this kid all of a sudden figured out that's the day he's going to take a shot at a president. I just don't believe things work that way.
That's probably true. And in normal circumstances, when those kind of things happen and it has to deal with the President of the United States or former President of the United States or a person running for President of the United States, they would never allow him to get behind the microphone that day. Exactly. And if they had any inkling that there was some type of threat or just a security breach, right? They don't have to know somebody's out there. They know that something's not secure. They wouldn't let the president of the United States go stand behind the microphone, right?
It's a complete dereliction of duty to have allowed that in the first place from all the different law enforcement entities that were there. You had the testimony from the one officer saying, and now we have the body cam footage where he's lifted onto the roof, and then he said Crooks pointed a gun at him. That happened a minute or so or 30 seconds before the shots started flying. So there was a lot of time to take care of the situation, and nobody sees the opportunity.
All that has to be said is gun.
That's it.
The Secret Service, there's a gun.
Yeah.
That's it.
Or if you're that police officer, you can't shoot him. Let's say you don't have a line of sight, shoot in the air. And that'll be enough to bring out the Secret Service agents to take the president off the stage.
It's funny because something else I thought was a little peculiar at the time, and I watched it pretty much live. The shot just happened. I was in the other room, and I came back, and it was all going on, is that everyone praised the Secret Service on their job that they were doing. But to me, it didn't look like they were really protecting him all the way. And it seemed like they were going through the motions a little bit. And in my mind, I said to myself, it's easy to stand, and they're risking their life standing in front of the bullets. I said to myself, but what if they knew that the threat wasn't real anymore? What if they knew the only gunman had been killed already? And they're really not standing in front of anything.
Yeah, it would seem to me that standard operating procedure in a shooting is to get the client on the floor away from line of sight. They did put their bodies in the line of sight. I just think that they need a little bit more training on that. I didn't understand that myself. They definitely stood in front of the president, but the move is to really, he went down on the floor himself. Just keep him there. Keep him there for a minute, 2 minutes, whatever you have to do until you know that the situation has been handled, then move him.
And as far as the other shots, so there was one shot that nicked the president's ear. We all know that. We've all seen the pictures. But there were other people that were injured or killed in the audience. Those happened prior to the president being shot or after, do you know? Or is it unclear?
It's unclear at this time. I watch a few websites, YouTube sites. One guy is John E. Hoover. So I recommend him. And he stated the other day that, which I never knew, don't know if it's true or not, but he said it, that the two individuals that are still alive were both hit by 2 shots each. The former fireman who was killed, he was hit by a shot. You'd have to determine if the shot that hit the president's ear was able to hit one of those guys. There definitely is video of a bullet exploding on a handrail. So that absolutely could have hit one of the guys and then hit the handrail. But that would eliminate that as being the bullet that took out the hydraulic line, because there was a hydraulic line that was hit, and you could see the hydraulic fluid spew out, and I think it might have been holding a flag or something. It was coming down. The whole hydraulic system was coming down.
And what I found interesting too, when we're talking about the shots, is that they were on multi levels. They weren't just line of sight with the president, right? Mm-hmm. They were the fireman was up many rows from the height of the gunman, which is on a roof, was shooting down at the president, right? How did the shot, now it would have to be a ricochet, which we don't know if it was or it wasn't, to be able to do something like that. And I find that very curious as well.
Yeah, that could potentially lend credence to the idea that somebody was shooting inside the building right below Crooks. He might have been shooting at fairly level to a little bit below the president, and that way the bullet would continue on a higher angle.
So I did hear that there was some talk about that there was other sniper teams in the building that had the open window, right? And that they were in there, they opened the window, and then they left. I'm not quite sure why they did that or why they would do that and why they would leave afterwards. It doesn't really make sense to me, but...
Nothing makes sense. And like I said, initially we were told that people were supposed to be on the roof, but it was hot that day, so they didn't go up there. I find that a little on the unprofessional side. If that's your job, that's your job.
These are pseudo-military guys.
Yeah.
And they're snipers. They've been in play. They were absolutely served as snipers in the military. They've been in the worst conditions you possibly can imagine and killed people.
Which is part of your training, both heat and cold. You have to be able to deal with the extremes and still take care of business. So, like I said, always keep asking the question why, and eventually you'll get to the answers. But there's definitely a lot of questions to be asked as to what went on in Butler.
I believe the FBI is acknowledging there were 8 shots now. Is that correct?
They found 8 shells on the roof. Initially,
they found 6, I thought.
Initially they found 5. And then another body cam footage was released, and they said that there was 8. But in that footage is also a break in the footage. Who knows? But yeah, they found, initially it was 5. We heard 5 from the body cam footage, then it went up to 8. There's definitely 8 shots going one way. So they're going to have to figure that out one way or another. So if they put it all on crooks, or if somebody comes up and says, listen, we have the technology to determine based upon these people who were videotaping, we now have the audio, and from the mathematical applications, we could determine where the shooters actually were. That technology does exist. Municipalities have that to be able to locate shooters. I would think at some point in time, some of these people that are on YouTube that have donations coming their way will be able to put out something which will probably be mathematically irrefutable. And then they're going to have to deal with that.
The shooter's one thing, right? The next thing is the Secret Service. So we spoke a little bit about it. I know you and I have talked about it originally, and that's how we got to this podcast on it. And that is the past of the head of the Secret Service, and I can't remember her name for a minute. What's her name again?
It escapes me.
All right, well, I'll put it in later. I can't remember, but she has a long and checkered past as a Secret Service agent, and she has a relationship to, the guy in government that everybody loved to hate, Dick Cheney, which is interesting because we know that Dick Cheney was the man lying to us about weapons of mass destruction. Right. We know that he is motivated by things other than, I think, the country's best interests. It's fair to say that he had other motivations, whether they be money, whether they be friends, whether they be political beliefs or political motives. He certainly had it about weapons of mass destruction. And what was his motivation for that? We could talk about that for days, right? But maybe you could tell us a little bit about the relationship, or what we think we know about the relationship between the head of the Secret Service and Dick Cheney.
She was part of his Secret Service detail. I guess they had developed a decent relationship, and then she went to work for his daughter, I believe. And she was part of the detail after he was vice president as well. Then she got the job at, PepsiCo?
PepsiCo,
yeah, to be the head of their security. But I think that between Dick Cheney and his daughter Liz, there's a long-standing familial relationship there. And there's definitely a significant hatred of Donald Trump by those people.
Yeah, I believe, and maybe you can confirm this for me, that she was Cheney's body man on 9/11, and that she went down in the bunker with him, and they were there for a long time. And we can go through Dick Cheney and 9/11 on another day, but it would seem that they've been together a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And it would seem they have this relationship. Now, I've also seen, and you could verify this for me, I've also seen videos where Dick Cheney is making political statements in favor of his daughter and against Donald Trump. Obviously, there was a long criticism from a Republican, Dick Cheney's daughter, criticizing Trump as pretty much evil, right? Not that they had political differences, pretty much evil. Not that he should be voted out, that he should be stopped, is the words I heard them use.
Yes. Another interesting podcast YouTube channel is America's Untold Stories, and that's the position of Mark Robert. He lays the foundation of Butler right at the door of Dick Cheney. So it's an interesting position. Who knows? Yeah, maybe he's right. I don't know. But there's definitely a personal hatred there. You could see it in the speech that he gave, the commercial that he was doing. The language that he used was not typical political terms. You don't have to stop somebody, just defeat them at the polls and they're done. So when you use the word stop, what exactly are you saying? So,
it almost, when I saw it, it almost seemed like a call to arms.
yes. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, like a signal is being given.
It wasn't even hate speech. It was beyond that.
Yeah.
It was like, we have to do what we have to stop this man.
Yeah.
And I'm saying to myself, what does that mean? That's what I said. And I take words literally. I'm a lawyer, right? So I take words literally. And I was surprised at best.
Dick Cheney is nobody to cross. He shot a guy with a shotgun in the face, and the guy wound up apologizing to him. I think he's somebody who definitely creates an atmosphere of fear around him.
I never forget about reading, and I think it was one of the Watergate guys who writes all those books.
E. Howard Hunt?
No, not one of the reporters.
Oh, yeah.
Not Bernstein. Yeah. Woodward writes all those great books about
Woodward.
the presidency.
Yeah.
They give him full access. They tell him all the bad stuff, and then he writes a book about it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But he wrote great books about Trump at war. All those books were fantastic. And because he gets great interviews, people tell him great stuff. And I guess once you're president, you don't really care what anybody knows. You're not running. You go one more election, and then that's it. You have nothing else to do. So what can they do to you?
Right.
Unless you're Donald Trump.
Right.
And he had... I lost my train of thought. What was I talking about?
Bob Woodward and the books, the interviews that he gave.
Oh, on his interview, thank you. When Bob Woodward was doing the interview, Bob Woodward was giving an interview regarding Cheney making Colin Powell, who's probably the most honorable man in the universe, right? Here's a guy that came from, I think he grew up in Harlem or something.
Yes.
And made a name for himself in the military and became head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, right? And then becomes secretary to the UN. He also was, was he
Secretary of State?
He was Secretary of State. They sent him to the UN to lie to the UN about weapons of mass destruction. And he knew it was a lie.
Yep.
And Cheney sent him in there anyway. And listen, he did what he was told by his boss, but he didn't like it. And it was really clear.
And I think that's what happens in some of the assassinations where you get a message from somebody that says, this is, protection has to be pulled. We have to take care of something. And the rest becomes history, or sometimes close to being history, is in what happened in Butler.
So maybe we briefly, is there anything else we want to say about Trump? We covered a lot. There's a lot of questions to be answered, and we'll come back to this again. The other last thing I'm going to say is I found it interesting, much like Dallas, that before the day was over, people were washing and scrubbing and cleaning. The FBI or whoever was there, Secret Service, I think it was the FBI, were there washing the roof down with a hose to get the kid's blood off. And it was still a crime scene.
I don't understand it. You would have thought in Butler, for several days, there would have been hundreds of people combing the entire area, looking for bullets. Maybe a shell went into the ground and looked for a bullet furrow or something, hit a tree. But there was none of that. And like you said, they cleaned up the roof quite quickly. It wasn't as egregious as what happened in Dallas when the Secret Service actually started cleaning the president's blood from the back of the limo and picking up whatever bullet fragments were there. But it was still bad.
Yeah, or changing the window.
Yeah, well, that
changing the window so there wouldn't be any bullet holes in it.
Yeah, that was a Lyndon Johnson thing. He sent out the limousine, which was a crime scene, to, I believe it went to Ford in Michigan. The windshield was removed from everybody who was at Parkland who saw it. They said that there was a clear bullet hole through the windshield. And there's photos of it, but the windshield itself has been lost to history.
Right. Maybe we'll just touch on the Kennedy assassination because it's so relevant, I guess, about it. I am still mystified of all the things that have come out recently about it. And you see just how complex a web this was and how that Kennedy had basically, and I find the correlation to Trump is Trump being this non-political entity where he doesn't have any relationships and he dislikes the CIA, he dislikes the FBI, he wants to disassemble it, cut off their money. And as president of the United States, he has power to do those things. The NSA, all that stuff flows right from the executive privilege, executive powers. That those are almost the final words that Kennedy says before he's killed. That I'm gonna withdraw. He gives the executive order, withdraw from Vietnam, to cut off all the money, to cut off everything. And I know that we've both watched the prologue to Ford Died Trying.
Right.
And that is and if anybody could see that, it's definitely on iTunes. And there's also a Patreon thing, which Dom and I have not watched, regarding, I don't know what that was.
Not me.
Not me either. Patreon thing where they compare the four major assassinations of the 60s, and that is two Kennedys, Malcolm X, and MLK.
Right.
And they show tape of them talking about withdrawing from Vietnam. And everybody says, and Malcolm X, of course, and MLK all talk at great lengths that it's the military that's keeping all these things going, and that it's only black men that are going. And in those days, for everybody that doesn't remember or too young to remember, if you went to college, you got a deferment. You didn't get drafted. So needless to say, the colleges were full to the brim. A lot of the intellectuals never complained, right?
Absolutely.
So there is that kind of correlation of the powers that be taking on the juggernaut that is the United States government, who is moving in one single direction. And Dom also, as far as RFK, Dom also turned me on to a great documentary, and I urge you all to watch it. It's on YouTube, called RFK Must Die. And it's amazing, and maybe you could talk a little bit about it. It's amazing when you look back at the video that people are identifying CIA agents that happen to be in the crowd of the Ambassador Hotel at 2 or 3 in the morning or whatever it was, just standing around. And people identify people. And strangely enough, that these people that were just standing around not only were in the CIA, but they were the heads of the assassination units of the CIA. And then there's the assassination, and people are doing interviews, and some of them were even interviewed, and they don't seem fazed on what just happened.
So one of the people who was there, he was identified by a few of his friends in the CIA, was David Morales. To give a brief history.
And he was a bad dude.
You need people like him sometimes to take care of business. But yes, he was definitely he was not somebody you want to cross, let's put it that way.
I agree with you.
Right. What happened was, in the early 1960s, the CIA set up a operation run out of Miami. It was a JM Wave station where they conducted warfare against Cuba, burning crops and trying to jam up their economy and bringing guns to anti-Castro Cubans who were still on the island. And one of the things that morphed out of that was a thing called ZR Rifle. So ZR Rifle was run by a guy named William Harvey. And he immediately reached out to David Morales to be part of it. And I believe that ZR Rifle was the center of where the plan to kill the president came out of, because ZR Rifle, they intended to kill Fidel Castro. So they were putting together plans, and that's when they hooked up with major mob figures. Santo Trafficante, the boss of Florida, Sam Giancana, the boss of Chicago. And this has been proven through congressional testimony in the mid-1970s, a church committee. So this isn't a conspiracy theory.
It's fact.
It's a fact. It's not disputable. So, and they, of course, were working with anti-Castro Cubans who were being trained on a place called No Name Key down in Florida, and also at Lake Pontchartrain outside of New Orleans. So I think what happened was, as the various plots against Castro failed to materialize, their hatred of Kennedy started to increase. And at some point in time, somebody said, you know what, let's get rid of this guy instead. And I think that you had those three forces together, the CIA officers like David Morales and David Atlee Phillips and William Harvey, putting together a assassination plot along with mob guys and using the anti-Castro Cubans as the mercenaries on the ground. I think that was the beginnings of the plot to kill the president. I think it came out of ZR Rifle.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Giancana, he was, I think his nickname was Momo.
Yeah.
So Momo was easier for me to say.
Yeah.
Momo was asked by Frank Sinatra on the behest of Kennedy's dad, who was pretty much hated by most people anyway because he was involved in the capitulation of Hitler when he was him and Chamberlain went to Hitler and signed the treaty. Was it Poland or Czechoslovakia? I think it was Poland, and it could have been either one. And they come back with the paper that they cut a deal and Hitler's not going to take anymore, and Hitler takes the whole place. So he had been hated for some time by the government, but he wanted to get his son president, and his first son that he wanted to be president was killed in the service, and then it fell upon John. It was never supposed to. So they knew it was going to be a tight election, and his father, John's father, talks to Sinatra and says, because Sinatra was warming up to the Kennedys, some through his friend, Rack Pack friend, who was married to
Peter Lawford.
Peter Lawford was married to sister. Yep. So that gave him a little bit of an avenue both ways. So he goes to Momo and says, I need you to help us get your guys to run for election. And supposedly he says, to at least my understanding is, he says to Sinatra, why do you want to help that Irish prick for? Which is what Italians said in the day.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm asking you to do this for me. And he goes, oh, it's a favor? And he goes, oh, done. And he fixed it. Of course, from that day on, Sinatra was indebted to him.
Right.
Because now we're in business, right?
Yeah.
Business with these guys is no joke. He was a bagman for him and carried money all over the place in Cuba and all those things.
Yeah, well, the mob's assistance for the 1960 election has been pretty well documented by the FBI. They had agents following mob couriers, and they saw bags, which they assume had carried cash, handed over to Kennedy officials in, I think it was West Virginia, for the West Virginia primary. They certainly helped out in Chicago. My understanding is that a lot of voting machines in Republican districts are now at the bottom of Lake Michigan.
And I heard they were going to graveyards and writing people's names down and going voting for the people that had just died.
Yeah.
And they were doing all these kinds of things. And obviously they had control of the unions in Chicago, so they got all the union guys to vote. So they won, and the election was so close. And I think Nixon knew that if he challenged it, he would have won, but he knew everybody'd still hate him.
Yeah, at that time, things were a little bit more, maybe the word is honorable, where you didn't challenge an election. That's how Lyndon Johnson started in politics. He lost an election, didn't challenge it, and then figured out a way to cheat. He was cheating from that point on. But the problem was Joe Kennedy, the father, was business partners with Frank Costello. They were bootleggers together during Prohibition. And when the mob signed on to help John become president, they fulfilled their end of the bargain. And I believe that what happened was Kennedy double-crossed them by telling Jack to have Bobby as the attorney general. Now, Bobby, I believe at that time was 34 years old and never tried a case in his life. But he had tangled with mob guys being part of the McClellan Committee. And I believe that what Joe was trying to do was wipe out family history. At that time, you didn't have mob guys going on telling their stories to people. Everybody kept quiet. So if they were put away in jail, they would never say, listen, I was business partners with your father. That would never come out. So I think that's what Joe did. He pulled a double cross on the mob with his desire to wipe out Kennedy family history. And that's why he unleashed Bobby. And to this day, it's still been the most, he was like Giuliani on steroids because he did it throughout the United States. The mob boss of Louisiana, Carlos Marcello, was literally kidnapped off the streets and dropped off in Guatemala. What had happened was he was born in Sicily, and as a child, for some reason, they landed first in Guatemala before they came to the United States. So the Kennedy administration figured that the only legitimate place to send him was Guatemala. So he's walking down the street. He's not brought into a courtroom or anything like that. He's put on a plane. And the next thing he knows, he's landing in the Guatemalan desert. A jungle. They played hardball. Giancana they had tapes they were tapping his phone and tapping all these different places. And believe it or not, Sam Giancana actually took them to court because they never got a judge's permission to do it. That might have been a case where the FBI was doing him a favor. They were trying to make it seem like they were helping the Kennedy administration, but by overreaching, they knew that any evidence would be fruit of the poison tree, so it would be gone forever. Because at that time, the mob did have a very good relationship with J. Edgar Hoover, and Hoover definitely did not like the Kennedys. But that's what was going on. Bobby Kennedy did a full court press on the mob.
And you think that was on behest of the father, huh?
Well, it's known that
I didn't know
Joe told Jack to use Bobby as AG. And that's what I think was the purpose, to destroy any connections between the Kennedys and various mob people. That's how they made some of their money.
And you have to believe that if Bobby became president, that he would have launched an investigation of what happened to his dad, his brother.
Yeah, no.
Even his son says that today.
Yeah. So getting back to what you were talking about with the video in the Ambassador Hotel, you had David Morales there, and then there was another CIA official named George Giannides. So George Giannides was also one of those guys that was out of Jam Wave in the early 1970s. Early 1960s. And what happened was, when the House Assassinations Committee started in 1976, and I think their report came out in 79, the deal that Robert Blakely, who ran the House Assassinations Committee, made with the CIA was that he wanted somebody who did not work for the agency in the early 60s, had nothing to do with it, and that would be like his contact guy. Who do they put there but George Giannides? And he worked for the CIA in the early 60s. And then, like I said, he's in the Ambassador Hotel when Robert gets it. Very powerful people. And with all the things that the CIA has done, to my knowledge, there's never been a single one ever arrested for anything.
It's really funny. And just so many things. We could go on all night about the things, especially with Bobby, because we've been down that road once already. And Bobby's a little bit later, and people were a little bit more aware.
That was probably the first use of an MK Ultra assassin.
The woman in the polka dot dress?
No, Sirhan.
Oh, Sirhan. That's right.
Yeah, Sirhan.
So and it's funny, just so everybody knows, is that Sirhan's parole hearing, the main witness is Robert Kennedy Jr.
Yeah.
Because he believes that the CIA killed his father and that Sirhan was a puppet, mind control or whatever MK Ultra was, that was right out of the Manchurian Candidate and the Queen of Hearts or whatever. Right. Was it Queen of Hearts or Queen of Spades?
I think it was Queen of Hearts.
Queen of Hearts, where somehow this woman in this dress like turned him on because he swears he doesn't remember anything. Yeah. And probably if he admitted what he did and did it and had regretted, they would have let him out by now.
Yeah, that's true.
But because that's the way it works, right? You have to admit you did it. But he doesn't believe he did it. Matter of fact, he doesn't remember doing it.
Yeah, that's the problem with I don't know if it's state by state, but certainly in California with parole hearings, it's not an opportunity to retry the case. You have to talk about how, the time in jail has changed you as a person. You've understood what you did. And the problem with Sirhan since 1968, he never understood what he did because he has no memory of it. So...
yeah. But there is some conversations that were taking place, and you see them in the documentary, of people talking about I don't know, was it a Latin man or something, and a woman in a polka dot dress who came out and said, "We killed Kennedy."
Yeah. Yeah, she said that to a woman, and she was a Kennedy party official. And that Deborah Serrano, I think was her name. And she was absolutely abused during her polygraph hearing by the police officer in charge. What happened was the LA police put together this thing called Special Units Senator. And the two police officers that were involved both happened to be trained by the Central Intelligence Agencies.
There happened to be a lot of Central Intelligence people wandering around the Ambassador Hotel at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was.
Yeah.
I remember I was 68, I was 9, maybe 10, 9 or 10. And I remember I was sound asleep in my bed, getting ready for school, and my sister came in and woke me up and said, somebody killed Bobby Kennedy, or somebody shot Bobby Kennedy. So, and that was after Martin Luther King, was prior in April. So this was in June.
Yep, June 5th, I believe.
Yeah, June 5th. It's strangely, it's also my sister's wedding anniversary. Oh. So it's a little strange, right? A little twist how coincidences are. So
did her marriage fare better?
Yeah, a little bit better. They're still married all these years better since I was 17 till now, and I'm 65. So I guess they did a pretty good job. So, Mayor, if you're listening, I just put in a good word for you. I think, is there anything else we want to touch on before we call it an episode for now? So this is a topic we'll may come back to. Certainly there's going to be more evidence about what happened at the Trump. There will be a report someday, and I'm sure it'll come out way after, when it doesn't mean anything anymore. Yeah. And people just shake their heads and say, let's move on.
Yep. Probably. Depends who wins.
And I don't know. I sometimes think that part of Biden stepping down is part of burying whatever happened here. What his role, if any, in this, who knows? Other being not asleep at the switch kind of thing is possible too. But you wonder how the head of the Secret Service was picked. You wonder, you hear all these things about what she required agents to do, and it seems like a softening of the softer side of the Secret Service, which you would seem, it's like having woke special forces. It's like having woke SEAL Team 6. It doesn't really work, right? Absolutely. You get the craziest, toughest people go in and do things that's impossible and do them right every time. Yep. And that's what Secret Service has always been. That's it. I appreciate your time, Don.
Well, thank you very much.
I appreciate everybody for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Just so you know, our next episode is going to be on the Titanic. I'm bringing in someone whose family was on the Titanic, Isadora Strauss. I know everyone has seen the movie or read the book, or either movie would know who they were because they are so prominent in every story, because rather than getting on the boats, they decided to go down together and not leave each other. So I guess that's the most romantic thing you possibly could imagine. I look forward to that. I hope you enjoy this episode, and thank you for coming, Dom. And we'll have you on. We'll have you on again. All right. Goodbye, everybody. Talk to you soon.